In the quiet neighborhood of Serene Village, where time seemed to slow down, routine was an old friend. Every day at 3 in the afternoon, Mrs. Margareth, a lady with white hair and bright eyes, would go to the local park. With her cane in one hand and a basket of bread in the other, she fed the birds while watching the children play. It was a ritual that brought her peace and a sense of continuity. One day, while Margareth was sitting on her favorite bench, a young man named Philip, who had recently moved to the neighborhood, hurried through the park. He was worried, his mind full of thoughts about college and the challenges of the new city. Philip, with brown hair and a shy smile, had just left a job interview. Seeing Philip, Mrs. Margaretha's eyes filled with tears. Her heart raced and a feeling of déjà vu washed over her. She believed she was seeing her grandson Richard, who had mysteriously disappeared many years ago. Without hesitation, she called out, "Richard, is that you, my dear?" Philip stopped abruptly, confused and surprised. He looked around to see if anyone else had noticed the sudden commotion. The old lady's eyes were fixed on him, full of a mixture of hope and sadness. Unsure of what to do, he approached her slowly. "Excuse me, ma'am, my name is Philip. I think you have me mistaken for someone else," he said gently and understandingly. Mrs. Margareth, still emotional, insisted, No, you are my Richard. I would never forget my grandson's face." She grasped Philip's hand tightly, as if afraid he would disappear again. Philip felt an unexpected warmth in his heart. There was something in the pain in Mrs. Margaretha's eyes that moved him deeply. He decided to sit next to her, even without fully understanding the situation. As she told stories about Richard, Philip listened attentively, feeling an inexplicable connection with the old lady. At that moment, the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the park. The birds, now sated, sang a soft melody. Philip realized that, somehow, he was meant to be there at that very moment. He promised himself that he would return the next day, not just to clarify the misunderstanding, but to learn more about Mrs. Margareth and the mystery surrounding Richard. And so, the unexpected encounter in the park marked the beginning of a journey of discoveries, where the past and present would intertwine in surprising and emotional ways. The next day, Philip returned to the park, determined to learn more about Mrs. Margaretha's life and the disappearance of her grandson, Richard. The morning sun bathed the park in a soft light, and the sound of birds created a tranquil soundtrack for the start of another day. Philip spotted Mrs. Margareth sitting on her usual bench, with a basket of bread by her side as always. As he approached, Philip noticed that Margareth had a photo album on her lap. She looked up and smiled with an expression of relief upon seeing him. "Richard, you came back," she said with the same conviction as the day before. Philip sat down next to her, determined to listen to her story. "Mrs. Margareth, I promised I would return. I would like to hear more about Richard and understand what happened to him," he said with a soft and empathetic voice. Margareth opened the album, revealing photos of a young man who looked incredibly like Philip. "This is Richard," she said, pointing to a photo of a smiling young man at a family birthday party. "He disappeared many years ago. He was my only grandson, and the pain of losing him never went away." As she turned the pages, Margareth recounted Richard's story. He was a joyful and promising young man, full of dreams and hopes. Richard loved music and played the guitar, she recalled, her eyes shining with memories of happy moments. He always dreamed of becoming a musician, but one day he just disappeared. The police never found any clues, and since then, my life has been empty. Philip felt a deep sadness hearing her story. "Mrs. Margareth, I'm so sorry for your loss." But I'm not Richard. My name is Philip, and I came from another city to study here. However, I feel an inexplicable connection to your story and want to help." Margareth sighed, closing the album gently. "I know you are not really Richard, Philip, but you look so much like him that it makes me feel like he is still around. Maybe you were sent to bring me peace and answers." Philip was silent for a moment, pondering her words. "I will help you find out what happened to Richard. I promise I will do my best to bring some closure to this pain." In the days that followed, Philip visited Margareth regularly. They became inseparable companions, united by the quest for the truth and the desire to heal old wounds. With each meeting, new pieces of the puzzle were revealed, and Philip felt he was getting closer to an important discovery. Thus, the park became the setting for an unlikely friendship, where a young man and an elderly lady joined in a journey of discovery, hope, and redemption. Together, they were determined to unearth the secrets of the past and find the truth behind Richard's disappearance. Philip decided that the first step to helping Mrs. Margareth would be to thoroughly investigate Richard's disappearance. On a sunny morning, he headed to the municipal library, a place where he believed he could find old information that might give some clue about Margaretha's lost grandson. The library was an old building with shelves that seemed to touch the ceiling. The smell of old books permeated the air, and there was an almost reverential silence in the environment. Philip approached the information desk, where a librarian with large glasses and a welcoming smile greeted him. "Hello, how can I help you?" the librarian asked. "Good morning," Philip replied. "I'm looking for old newspapers or records that might contain information about the disappearance of a young man named Richard that happened many years ago." The librarian frowned in concentration and gestured for Philip to follow her. "Let's go to the archives section. If there is anything, it will probably be there." They walked through narrow corridors filled with books and documents until they reached a small, quiet room. The librarian began searching through the archives, pulling out old newspapers and magazines. Philip sat at a wooden table, waiting anxiously for any clue he might find. After some time, the librarian returned with a stack of yellowed newspapers. "Here are some editions from the time you mentioned. I hope you find what you're looking for." Philip began to leaf through the newspapers, feeling the tension rise with each turned page. Finally, he found a headline that caught his attention. "Young man mysteriously disappears. Richard, 18, sought by family and police." The article described Richard's disappearance, including details about his last appearance and the police's frustrated efforts to find him. Reading the article left Philip shaken. Mrs. Margaretha's words echoed in his mind, bringing to light the image of the smiling young man in the album photos. Feeling even more determined to solve the mystery, he copied the most relevant information and put the newspapers back on the shelf. Philip knew he needed more information, so he decided to visit the local police station. Perhaps the police records could offer new leads or contacts that he had not yet explored. The journey to uncover the truth was just beginning, and each step seemed to bring Philip closer to something big and unexpected. As he left the library, Philip felt a mix of hope and apprehension. He was determined to help Mrs. Margareth, not only to bring peace to the elderly lady, but also to find answers to the questions that now filled his own mind. Richard's story was more than a mystery. It was a journey of discoveries that united the past and the present in a way Philip could never have imagined. Determined to advance his investigation, Philip headed to the local police station, hoping to find more details about Richard's disappearance. The police station, a sturdy red brick building, exuded an aura of authority and seriousness. Philip entered the building, feeling a knot in his stomach as he approached the reception desk. "Good morning, how can I help you?" asked a middle-aged police officer with an attentive and professional look. "Good morning," replied Philip, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm investigating the disappearance of a young man named Richard that happened many years ago. I would like to access the case files if possible." The police officer raised an intrigued eyebrow. "Are you a family member?" "No, but I'm helping Mrs. Margareth, Richard's grandmother. She believes he might still be alive, and I want to do whatever I can to help her." The officer nodded, understanding the situation. "Wait a moment. I'll check if we can release that information to you." Philip waited anxiously while the officer consulted a superior. A few minutes later, he was led to a back room where old files were kept. The officer returned with an aged folder, Richard Fernandez, written by hand on the cover. "You can review the documents here, but you can't take them out. We need to keep everything on record," explained the officer, leaving Philip alone in the room. With trembling hands, Philip opened the folder and began examining the documents. There were witness reports, investigator notes, and old photos. Each page revealed a little more about Richard's life before his disappearance. He discovered that Richard was a bright and promising young man, but there were also mentions of family conflicts and personal struggles. One of the witnesses mentioned seeing Richard talking to an unknown man days before he disappeared. The report included a detailed description of the man, but no confirmed identity. Another note spoke of an unconfirmed lead that Richard might have fled to another city in search of a better life, but there was no concrete evidence. Philip also found a letter written by Richard and addressed to his grandmother. In the letter, Richard expressed his love for Mrs. Margareth and apologized for any worry he had caused. He mentioned facing personal problems and felt he needed to get away to find peace. Reading the letter moved Philip deeply. He felt Richard's anguish, his quest for freedom, and his deep love for his grandmother. It was evident that Richard had not planned to disappear forever, but wanted to resolve his problems before returning. Philip made careful notes and took photos of the most important documents with his phone, promising himself to share everything with Mrs. Margareth. As he left the police station, Philip felt more determined than ever to find Richard, or at least discover what really happened to him. The investigation was becoming personal, and each new discovery increased his empathy and connection to Richard and Mrs. Margareth's story. He knew he was on the right path, but the journey was far from over. Philip left the police station with the folder of documents firmly in his hands. Every step he took seemed lighter, yet laden with the weight of the newly discovered revelations. He headed to the local library, an old and imposing building with shelves filled with books that held centuries of stories and secrets. In the welcoming silence of the library, Philip found an isolated study table. He sat down and began to examine the documents more closely. Among the yellowed pages, a clue caught his attention, a reference to a shelter for young people in a nearby city where Richard might have found refuge. The name of the place was House of Hope. Determining that this was a lead that could not be ignored, Philip decided to call the shelter. He found the phone number in an old city directory and, with trembling fingers, dialed. After a few rings, a gentle voice answered. "House of Hope, how can I help you?" The voice sounded warm and welcoming, a reflection of the place's name. "Hello, my name is Philip. I am investigating the disappearance of a young man named Richard Fernandez, who might have spent some time at your shelter many years ago. Could you check if there is any record of him?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of keys being pressed. "I will check the archives, sir. Please hold on a moment." As he waited, Philip felt a mix of hope and anxiety. If Richard had indeed been there, he might be closer to finding answers. The voice returned. Yes, we have a record of a young man named Richard Fernandez. He stayed with us for a few months before moving on. We do not have many details, but there is a note that he left a letter for someone named Margareth. Philip felt a chill run down his spine. Could you send me a copy of that letter? Of course. I will need your email. Philip provided his details and thanked the person profusely. Minutes later, he received a notification on his phone. Richard's letter was there. With a racing heart, he opened the email and began to read. The letter was short but full of emotion. Richard explained that he was trying to find his way and promised to return home as soon as he was ready. He mentioned a specific place, a park where he used to play as a child, as a meeting point if something happened. Reading the letter brought tears to Philip's eyes. He felt Richard's pain and hope and knew he had to continue the search. With the new clue in hand, he decided that his next stop would be the park mentioned in the letter. He was determined to follow every possible step to find Richard, or at least give Mrs. Margareth the peace of knowing what happened to her grandson. Philip left the library with a renewed determination, feeling more connected than ever to Richard's story. He knew he was closer to unraveling the mystery, but also aware that the journey still had many twists and turns. Philip walked through the city streets, following the map on his phone to the park mentioned in Richard's letter. The city, with its nostalgic charm, seemed to welcome Philip's steps as if the very streets wanted to help him find answers. The afternoon sun painted the trees and benches in the park with a golden light, creating an almost magical scene. The park was a haven of tranquility, with children playing, couples strolling hand in hand, and elderly people sitting on benches talking about the old days. Philip felt a wave of emotions imagining Richard running there as a child, perhaps on the same paths he was now walking. He approached one of the benches mentioned in the letter, an old wooden bench situated near a serene lake. He sat down and tried to imagine Richard sitting there, writing his letter, looking at the horizon in search of hope and answers. The gentle sound of the lake's water lapping at the shores and the birds singing around created an atmosphere of peace. While sitting, Philip noticed something peculiar. The bench had several inscriptions carved into the wood, initials and dates from past years. One inscription in particular caught his attention, RF 2005. His heart raced. Could this be a mark left by Richard Fernandez? Determined not to let any clue slip by, Philip began asking park-goers if they knew anyone with the initials RF, or if they remembered a young man named Richard who used to frequent the park. The responses varied from confused looks to friendly smiles, but no concrete information. Then, an elderly lady who was feeding the birds nearby approached. "Are you looking for Richard Fernandez?" Her voice was soft but laden with wisdom. Philip turned, surprised and hopeful. "Yes, I am. Did you know him?" She nodded, a nostalgic smile forming on her lips. "Yes, I knew him. He used to come here often. He would sit on this very bench, looking at the lake. He always brought a notebook with him. One day, he told me he was looking for his family, trying to understand his past." Philip's heart beat faster. "Do you know where he went?" The lady sighed, looking at the horizon as if reliving old memories. "Richard told me he was going to a nearby city to seek more information about his biological parents. He said he would return when he had answers, but I never saw him again after that." Philip thanked the lady deeply and continued the conversation, trying to extract more details. Every word she spoke was a crucial piece of the puzzle. She mentioned that Richard often talked about an orphanage in the neighboring city where he believed he could find information about his parents. Armed with this new clue, Philip felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew his journey was far from over, but the park had revealed a path to follow. He bid the lady a sincere thank you and left the park feeling closer to unraveling the mystery surrounding Richard. As he walked back home, Philip reflected on the determination and hope that guided Richard. He was resolved to follow every lead, no matter how small, until he could bring answers to Mrs. Margareth and perhaps bring Richard back home. The new clue leading to the orphanage in the nearby city was like a spark of hope for Philip. He decided not to waste any time and, the next morning, took a bus to the small town of Villa Esperança. The trip was peaceful, but Philip's mind was busy, filled with questions and expectations. Upon arriving in the town, he went straight to the orphanage mentioned by the lady in the park. The place was an old but well-preserved building, with a welcoming garden in front. Children played happily, their laughter filling the air with a sense of innocence and joy. Philip approached the entrance and was greeted by a kind staff member. He briefly explained his mission, mentioning Richard Fernandez and showing the letter and information he had collected. The staff member, though surprised, was understanding and led him to the orphanage director, Dona Helena. Dona Helena was a middle-aged woman with gentle eyes that conveyed wisdom and compassion. Philip told her about his search, detailing each clue that had brought him there. When he mentioned the name Richard Fernandez, something in the director's eyes lit up. "I remember Richard," she said softly. "He was here many years ago looking for information about his family. He was a determined young man, full of hope despite so many uncertainties." Philip felt a mix of relief and anxiety. "Do you know what happened to him after he left here?"
Donna Helena nuda.
Yes, Richard found some records indicating that his biological parents had left Villa Esperança years ago. He decided to follow these clues and left in search of more answers. He was especially interested in an old shelter on the outskirts of town. The director then offered to show Philip the orphanage records. Together they searched through old archives, looking for any additional information that might be useful. Among the time-yellowed papers, they found a note written by Richard. It was a brief letter, written in careful handwriting, where he expressed gratitude to the orphanage and mentioned the shelter he intended to visit. Philip held the letter with trembling hands, feeling a deep connection to Richard. The director provided him with the address of the old shelter, which was now abandoned but might contain clues about the next step in the search. With the new information in hand, Philip thanked Dona Helena deeply and prepared to visit the shelter. Richard's determination now seemed to fuel his own, and he was resolved to follow every lead to the end. Before leaving the orphanage, Philip spent some time watching the children play in the garden. He reflected on how each of them, like Richard, had their own story, hopes, and challenges. He promised himself he would do everything possible to bring peace and answers to Richard's story and, consequently, to Mrs. Margaretha's life. As he walked towards the old shelter, Philip felt that he was getting closer to unraveling the mystery. Each step seemed to guide him more deeply into Richard's story, and he was determined to discover the whole truth, no matter what he found along the way. The old shelter stood in the distance, shrouded in an aura of abandonment and silence. Philip walked with determination, feeling the tension increase with each step he took toward the time-worn building. The place seemed to echo with forgotten memories, stories waiting to be unraveled. As he approached, Philip noticed that the house, though uninhabited, was surprisingly intact. The sturdy wooden front door creaked open, revealing an interior covered in dust, but still bearing traces of its former function. Aged furniture and yellowed papers were scattered everywhere, as if time had stopped there. Philip began his search, carefully examining each room and every piece of paper he found. He felt that Richard had been there, that those walls had witnessed his hopes and disappointments. In one of the rooms, he found an old leather-bound notebook that looked like a diary. As he leafed through the diary, Philip discovered it belonged to a former employee of the shelter. The pages were filled with notes about the children who had passed through, their stories and their fates. And then, among the notes, he found Richard's name. Richard Fernandez, a boy with bright eyes and a hopeful smile, came to us looking for answers about his biological parents. Left the shelter with a new lead about a family in another city. Philip felt a chill run down his spine. The words in the diary confirmed that Richard had been there, just as the orphanage director had mentioned. But there was more. On a following page, there was a note about a woman visiting the shelter looking for a boy who had been adopted many years before. The woman seemed distressed, wearing a peculiar star-shaped necklace, saying she was looking for her lost son. The boy, according to her, had a birthmark on his left wrist. Philip remembered the description of the necklace given by Mrs. Margareth, and his heart raced. He knew this woman could be the key to unraveling the mystery. Continuing his reading, he found an address noted on the margin of the page, likely left by the woman in question. With a new clue in hand, Philip left the shelter with a mix of excitement and apprehension. He felt he was getting closer to the truth, that each new discovery was bringing him nearer to the full story of Richard. He knew he needed to find this woman, as she could be the final piece of the puzzle. As he walked back to the city, Philip reflected on the complexity of the lives intertwined by that necklace, by those relentless searches for answers. He was determined to follow this new lead, to find the woman who could reveal the truth about Richard's past, and thus bring peace to Mrs. Margaretha's heart. The journey was far from over, but Philip felt he was on the right path. Each step, each discovery was a tribute to Richard's hope and resilience, and he was willing to go to the end, no matter how challenging the road ahead might be. Philip, with the address in hand, felt the adrenaline coursing through his body as he walked through the city streets. The sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink as he headed to the address noted in the diary. Each step seemed to echo the anticipation of an encounter that could change everything. Upon arrival, he found a simple house with a small garden in front. There was something welcoming about the place, as if it held stories of love and loss within its walls. Philip took a deep breath, and with a mixture of anxiety and hope, he rang the doorbell. After a few moments, a woman with grey hair and gentle eyes opened the door. Her eyes widened when she saw the young man in front of her. Philip immediately noticed the star-shaped necklace hanging around her neck, just as described in the diary. "Good afternoon. My name is Philip," he began, trying to keep his voice calm. "I am looking for information about a man named Richard Fernandez. I believe you can help me." The woman invited him in, clearly intrigued by the unexpected visit. She introduced herself as Helena, and as they settled in the cozy living room, her eyes showed a mix of curiosity and a shadow of pain. "Richard Fernandez?" she repeated, as if the name brought back long-buried memories. "Yes, I knew a Richard many years ago, but he was just a boy then." Philip began to recount everything he had discovered so far about his search, and how her necklace was connected to Richard's story. Helena listened attentively, occasionally nodding as discreet tears ran down her face. "I searched for Richard for years," she said with a choked voice. "He was adopted by a family when he was just a baby, but I never managed to find him again. The necklace. It was a gift I gave to his adoptive mother. I always hoped that somehow it would bring him back to me." Philip felt a tightness in his chest as he heard Helena's story. He realized he was in the presence of a woman who, like Mrs. Margareth, had lost someone important and never stopped searching. Helena also mentioned a birthmark on the left wrist. Richard was born with a small star-shaped birthmark on his left wrist. It was a unique mark, something I always hoped would reunite us one day. I never gave up looking for him, but life pulled me away from that search for a long time. Philip then showed her a photo he had of Richard taken at an orphanage meeting. He noticed Helena's reaction upon seeing the image, a mix of surprise and recognition. "That's my Richard," she whispered, touching the photo with trembling fingers. "But he looks so different, so grown up. Where is he now?" Philip felt the weight of the truth on his shoulders, but knew he needed to be honest. Unfortunately, Dona Helena, Richard passed away recently. But he left a legacy, something I feel needs to be completed. And I believe that this journey, this search, can finally bring peace to everyone who loved him. Helena closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely. After a few moments, she looked at Philip with determination. "Thank you for bringing me these answers, Philip, and thank you for not giving up. Let's finish this journey together in Richard's honor." Philip nodded, feeling a deep connection with Helena. They had found each other through pain and hope, and now they were ready to face the next chapter of this story together. The next day, Philip and Helena went to the orphanage where Richard had spent part of his childhood. Despite its age, the building maintained a welcoming aura, as if the walls still held the laughter and tears of all the children who had lived there. The trees around it swayed gently in the breeze, creating an almost serene scene. Upon entering, they were greeted by the director, Dona Clara, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile and eyes that exuded wisdom and empathy. Philip explained the situation, mentioning the diary he found and the search for answers about Richard's life. "Ah yes, Richard Fernandez," Dona Clara said thoughtfully. "He was a very special boy. Everyone here adored him. Come, I think we have something that might interest you." She guided them through a hallway filled with photos and memories to an archive room. Amidst documents and records, Dona Clara pulled out an aged wooden box. When she opened it, she revealed a collection of letters, drawings, and small objects that belonged to the children who had passed through the orphanage. "We found this after Richard's death. It seemed important, so we kept everything here." Helena and Philip began to sift through the box carefully, each item telling a small part of Richard's story. There were letters written by him, drawings showing a boy with a vivid imagination and a generous heart. Suddenly, Helena found a letter addressed to her, written in Richard's childish handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope, and her eyes filled with tears as she began to read aloud. "Dear Mom, I know you always looked for me, and I want you to know that I thought about you every day too. Dona Clara told me many things about you and always told me never to lose hope. I never forgot your necklace and always hoped it would bring me back to you one day. With love, Richard." The room fell silent as Richard's words echoed, laden with love and longing. Helena clutched the letter to her chest, tears streaming freely. Philip, with a lump in his throat, looked at Dona Clara, who nodded with a sad smile. "He was always a very special boy," the director said softly. "He always believed he would find his family one day." Helena took a deep breath and looked at Philip. "We have to do something in his memory, something that honors his life and his desire to reunite the family." Philip nodded, feeling a renewed determination. "Let's make sure Richard's story and his search for love and family are not forgotten. We need to share this story so that everyone knows about the special boy he was and the mother who never gave up." Dona Clara smiled and placed a hand on Helena's shoulder. "And we here at the orphanage will do our part. We will create a memorial in Richard's honor, so that all the children who pass through here know they are loved and never lose hope." As they left the orphanage, Philip and Helena felt united by a common purpose. They knew there was still much to do, but they were sure they were on the right path. The truth about Richard was finally emerging, and with it, the promise of a future where love and hope would always prevail. In the following days, Helena and Philip dedicated themselves to honoring Richard's memory in a meaningful way. They decided to create a foundation in his name, aimed at helping vulnerable children by providing them with opportunities and a loving environment to grow up in. The foundation would be a beacon of hope, just as Richard had been for so many people in his short life. Helena felt a renewed energy with each step she took towards realizing this dream. With Philip's support and Dona Clara's guidance, they managed to gather volunteers and donations to kickstart the foundation. The community members, moved by Richard's story, contributed generously, eager to be part of something so noble. On a sunny morning, Helena, Philip, Dona Clara, and various supporters gathered at the orphanage for the official inauguration of the Richard Fernandez Foundation. The orphanage's garden was decorated with colorful flowers, balloons, and photos of Richard, capturing moments of his life that now inspired many. Helena stepped onto the makeshift stage, her heart pounding with emotion and gratitude. She looked at the crowd and began to speak, her voice filled with deep feelings. "Today, we are here to celebrate Richard's life and the legacy he left us. Richard was a boy who, despite all the adversities, never lost hope and love in his heart. The foundation we are inaugurating today is a tribute to his memory and a commitment to continue his mission of love and care for children in need." Philip, standing beside Helena, held her hand firmly, feeling the same fervor in his heart. He then approached the microphone to share his words. "Richard taught us that love and compassion are powerful forces capable of transforming lives. Every child who comes through this foundation will find a safe place where they are valued and supported. This is our commitment in Richard's honor." After the speeches, a commemorative plaque was unveiled, marking the official start of the foundation's activities. Everyone present applauded emotionally, feeling they were part of something grand and transformative. Helena and Philip dedicated themselves tirelessly to the foundation, working side by side with Dona Clara and other volunteers. They organized educational programs, recreational activities, and psychological support services for the children. Each smile they saw on the children's faces was a reminder of the positive impact they were making, keeping Richard's spirit alive. One afternoon, while tidying up one of the foundation's offices, Helena found another letter from Richard hidden among old papers. As she read it, she felt a familiar warmth in her heart, as if Richard were there with her. "Dear Mom, I know you are doing an incredible job. With every child you help, a part of me lives on. Thank you for never giving up on me and for turning my story into something that brings hope and love to so many others. With eternal love, Richard." Helena held the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of happiness and fulfillment. She knew Richard was proud and that his legacy would continue to inspire and transform lives. The foundation flourished, helping hundreds of children over the years. Richard's story became a symbol of resilience and love, reminding everyone that even in the most difficult moments, hope and love always find a way. With the passage of years, the Richard Fernandez Foundation became a beacon of hope in the community. The impact of its actions spread, touching lives and transforming destinies. Richard's story, told repeatedly, inspired those seeking strength to overcome their own challenges. Helena and Philip, now married, remained dedicated to the foundation's work. The love they shared was reflected in every project, every initiative, every smile of a supported child. Helena's house, once a place of sadness and uncertainty, had become a vibrant home of love and purpose, frequently visited by the Foundation's children and volunteers. One day, while reviewing plans for a new activity center, Helena received an unexpected visit. A young woman, with tears in her eyes and a shy smile, approached. It was Clara, Richard's mother, who had finally found the strength to confront her past and personally thank Helena. "I have no words to express my gratitude," Clara said, holding Helena's hand. "What you did for Richard and his legacy is something I never imagined possible. Thank you for transforming pain into hope, for giving the children the love and care I couldn't offer my son." Helena embraced her, feeling a deep connection with a woman who, despite her faults, was an essential part of Richard's story. "Clara, your courage in coming here today shows how much you have changed too. Richard united us in a way we could never have predicted, and your presence here is a testament to the power of forgiveness and renewal." Together, they walked through the Foundation's corridors, watching the children play, study, and dream of a better future. The joy and energy permeating the environment were a living testament to Richard's lasting impact. As Philip joined them, bringing an album of photos of the Foundation over the years, Clara flipped through the pages, seeing how Richard's memory had been honored and how many lives had been touched. Tears of emotion streamed down her face, but they were tears of redemption and peace. On a sunny afternoon, the Foundation organized a special event to celebrate another year of achievements. Helena, Philip, and Clara stood on stage, ready to share their stories and inspire others to continue the journey of love and compassion. When Helena took the microphone, her voice trembled with contained emotion. "Today, we celebrate not only Richard's memory, but also the strength we found in each other to move forward. Every child here, every smile, every dream realized, is a testament that love is the most powerful force that exists. Richard taught us that, and together, we will continue to spread this message." Philip, by her side, added, "This is just the beginning. The Richard Fernandez Foundation will continue to grow, helping more children, families, and communities find hope and renewal. We are all connected by this mission, and together, we will make the world a better place." The audience gave a standing ovation, moved by the words and the passion emanating from the stage. Clara, now with a serene smile, felt finally at peace, knowing that her son's memory would live forever, not just in her heart but also in the hearts of all who had been touched by his story. At the end of the event, children ran up to the stage, hugging Helena, Philip, and Clara, their laughter and joy filling the air. The sun set slowly, bathing everyone in a golden light that symbolized a new beginning, a bright future shaped by love and hope. And so, the story of Richard, Helena, Philip, and Clara became a legend of transformation, showing that even in the most difficult circumstances, compassion and love can create miracles and pave the way for new beginnings.